All right, good morning. It is June 21st, 2 or 3 days late compared to our regular delivery of Turf Team Times due to the university's observation of Juneteenth and the emancipation news that slaves had received down in Texas. I will tell you from employment standpoint, we got late notice on this on Thursday night, and so we had to scramble a little bit to change everything up. But we survived, and hopefully we'll be able to be a little bit more efficient with this going forward. Online today, we've got Dr. Dave Gardner, Todd Hicks, and the inimitable Pamela Sherratt, who is obviously getting ready to shout for England tomorrow, I think. Dave, you're up first.
All right. Good morning, everybody. So, yeah, all of a sudden it's already June 21st, longest day of the year, right? So I guess we've got another 3 weeks or so that the sunset will be after 9 o'clock here in Columbus. I love that. But yeah, it's already the first day of summer, right? And so we're starting to see some weed issues that we would normally associate with summertime, like crabgrass and sedges. Sedges are interesting because depending on where they are in the landscape, they're either just emerging or they could be rather large, like a foot tall or more. But it all depends, like I said, on where they are in the landscape. Remember, sedges, three-sided, they've got triangular shaped stems, but we've got a couple of different sedges that we worry about now. Yellow nut sedge is one that we've always seen here in Ohio, but we're starting to see more and more of a couple of additional sedges. One is annual sedge, the other one is Kyllinga. Now, when they bloom, it tends to be the easiest time to identify these because we always use that phrase, sedges have edges, they have triangular shaped stems. So it's really easy to tell that a weed in your landscape is a sedge, but exactly which one it is, sometimes that can be a little bit more difficult. But when they're in bloom, there's some pretty big differences in the appearance of the inflorescence with these. But one in particular, Kyllinga, it's a little bit different because it doesn't produce that little underground storage structure, the little bulblet or whatever that gives yellow nut sedge the name nut sedge. An annual sedge won't do that either. But with Kyllinga, what you get is a rhizome, much like what you get with Kentucky bluegrass. So what's neat about Kyllinga, unless you're trying to manage it, then it's not so neat, is that this can form mats in the turf and actually have high enough density that it can cause some competition issues. So you can actually choke out desirable grass. So whereas yellow nut sedge is just aesthetically displeasing, this one will actually seriously compete with your turf. So Kyllinga is something that we see generally in the southern half of Ohio, but I think this is something that is progressively marching northward. If you see sedges, it's better to hit them when they are younger. There's a variety of different products that are on the market, including some that have been released relatively recently. Sedgehammer and Dismiss are, a couple of the mainstays that are used in the industry, if you want to put it that way. Basagran's a little bit older material, contact product. It does have some good uses, though. If you've got sedge in your landscapes, then that's one that Basagran is a little bit safer over the top of ornamentals that the sedges might be growing through. So maybe one to check out there. But in turf, Sedgehammer, Dismiss, Imazosulfuron is Solero. That's a newer product. Trial that I did last year with all of these different products, Solero performed very, very well in that trial. And then there's a new herbicide just introduced last year. Pyrimesulfan's the active ingredient, and Vexus is the branded name. This is a little bit unique in that it's a granular formulation. So you can either buy it in a bag to apply it with a broadcast spreader, or they sell it in a shaker can for spot applications. The key is that you want to make sure that this is watered in within the time limit that's on the label. I believe that's 48 hours, but do check the label. And that's something of relevance this year because for the first time in 5 years, it's actually dry out. We have a rainfall deficit in many locations here in Ohio. So if you use this product, it works great. But again, with the caveat that it's a granule, it has great absorption by the roots, but it has to be watered in order for that to actually occur. If you are seeing issues with ground ivy or creeping Charlie, so this is one that we have a problem with controlling. Not just because it's so prolific in our landscapes, but these above ground runners, if you try to spray a herbicide and the idea is to get the herbicide to translocate through the whole plant, sometimes the cells that conduct water, and in this case, the herbicide, cavitate and collapse really, really easily, and it makes it so you can't translocate the herbicide through the whole plant, which makes ground ivy one of the more difficult weeds to control. Your options for this, there are a variety of different 3 or 4-way herbicides that preferably if you get one that contains triclopyr, dicamba, quinclorac, and or fluroxapyr. Those are 4 of the active ingredients that are known to have a little bit more activity on Creeping Charlie. Also, there is a herbicide, Sure Power. Flumioxazin is the active ingredient in Sure Power that makes that product so effective on Creeping Charlie. Sure Power actually is probably the one that will give you the quickest, most consistent control of Creeping Charlie, but you have to be careful with how you use that because flumioxazin will cause a little bit of discoloration of the turf. The safest time of year to use that product is actually now. So when the grass is not growing so quickly, but it's still green, you can get good control of the Creeping Charlie, and you're a little less likely to see some of the phytotoxicity issues that we see when applying flumioxazin. But again, that's a great product that you can potentially use for that. So just to finish up by mentioning that, yeah, for the first time since 2016, we actually have a rainfall deficit here in Columbus. This is an image that I lifted from the National Weather Service. Want to give credit where credit is due, but just to show that we're about 4 inches down on precipitation for the year. The last time that we had this much of a rainfall deficit was in 2012. And so my point is that, yeah, we're supposed to get a little bit of rain come through this evening in parts of Ohio, but overall, it's been a while since we've had a dry summer, and this is shaping up to maybe be one of those years. So, one thing that I would say right away is, plan on raising the height of cut where you can get away with that. Obviously, you're not going to, on a golf course putting green, increase the height by double or whatever, but in your low maintenance areas or other places, raising the height of cut will encourage the grass plant to root a little bit deeper. Also, you'll have some additional shading on the soil, which will reduce the evapotranspiration, hopefully a little bit. But again, that's one of the strategies that we talk about in drier years, is to mow where possible at a higher height of cut. But it's been 5 years since we've had to talk like that. So, this might all change if we get flooding rains this evening. But right now it's looking like this might be a dry year, and for the first time in quite some time. And that's all I have for today. Oh, it's no longer June 18th, is it? It's June 21st. Forgot to update that slide.
Terrible faux pas. Dave, thank you for that. All right, following up, Pamela Sherratt. Monday-itis. Pam, unmute yourself.
Good morning, everybody. Trying to share my screen. Here we go. All right, so I wanted just to talk for a few minutes about Poa trivialis, because I've noticed this week on sports fields and grounds that it is going dormant. And so just a quick background on rough bluegrass, which in America we call it rough bluegrass, Poa trivialis. In England, where I lived obviously previously, it was called rough stalked meadowgrass, which some people call it around the world. And I'm sure it's got other names, but the botanical name is Poa trivialis. So how do you separate it from the other bluegrasses? It has the same lime green color as Poa annua. It thrives in the spring. It likes the cool, shady, wet conditions. And it has the folded venation. It does have a long membranous ligule, which separates it out from Kentucky bluegrass. It does have those boat-shaped tips. The main difference between this and Poa annua or Kentucky bluegrass is that it's stoloniferous. And so that's one of the ways that you can separate it out. It's ubiquitous. We see it a lot in Ohio. And, why don't we just keep it on sports fields? Well, the main reason we don't like it on sports fields is that it's completely intolerant of heat, drought, and any kind of traffic. And what happens with Poa trivialis around this time of year, sometimes a little later, depending on the weather, but when we get high soil temperatures above 70 and daytime temperatures above 80, like we have right now, it will go dormant. It collapses, it folds down, and it's very commonly misdiagnosed as a disease. I've been called out to many sports fields in June, July, and August where they've thought they've had a disease, and when I've got out there, it's actually just rough bluegrass going dormant. And so it collapses, it goes brown, the leaves fold over, and actually you get this mat. And if you smell that mat, it smells somewhat musty. But if you were to dig down in there, you'll see that those stolons are still alive, and you may even see some green tissue. And so it's happening now. This is a little bit early. We used to see this predominantly in August, but I think just because of the high temperatures right now and the soil temperatures, we're seeing it in June and July. I probably should at some point look at the data on this, because with climate change and everything else, we might start to see these type of phenomena happening earlier in the season. As far as control, Dave can jump on and correct me if I'm wrong, but I still think we're in a position where there is no selective control for Poa trivialis. It's always been a non-selective and reseed, but I'm going to kick back to our weed expert, Dr. Dave Gardner, to jump in here, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
For the most part, that's correct. Yes, there are no selective options for us. Now, depending on what kind of grass that you're trying to manage, the herbicide Certainty with the active ingredient sulfylsulfuron has good activity on rough bluegrass. Unfortunately, it also has good activity on grasses like Kentucky bluegrass and perennial ryegrass. And so it's not really a good option to selectively remove rough bluegrass from cool season turf. So where we manage those types of grasses, the option is to spray Roundup or glyphosate. Not supposed to endorse products, right? But spray glyphosate and then, reseed. Unfortunately, since it's dormant right now, you can't just spray glyphosate on the dormant rough bluegrass. You have to wait for the rough bluegrass to come back, then spray it, then wait a little while to make sure that you actually treated it. Then you can reseed. So this ends up being a problem that you're going to see for the whole season. I wonder if the rough bluegrass going dormant earlier than it has in the past might, I don't know, be related to, the top layers of the soil are drying out a little bit earlier this season compared to years past, because instead of being 10 inches above normal, we're 5 inches down on the year. But just a fun fact, you used a fancy word, ubiquitous, and until the age of 15, I thought that word was pronounced ubiquitous, but I'm going to stop talking now.
Thank you, Dave. Yeah, I forgot to mention, it will come back. It will come back in September, and when conditions are more right for its growth. So when we cool down and we get, those fall rains, it will come back. There was some work that was done at the University of Guelph many years ago, where they looked at how to manage it organically without pesticides, and they, going on a very aggressive scarification and overseeding with a quick grass like perennial ryegrass did give some success. And so, that's one option for control, is to just go in there and scarify and try and get as much of that dead material out as you can. When it's dormant, try and get as much out as you can and keep aggressively overseeding with ryegrass. And there might be an opportunity to change the sward somewhat. So, okay. Dave, I once had a question when I was an undergrad in England. I had a question on my exam, which was 2 hours long, and it was just one question, and it said, fungi are ubiquitous, discuss. So, yeah.
Pam started out with the germ theory. Following up from that, the inimitable Mr. Todd Hicks with a disease update.
Thanks, Ed. Morning, everybody. Not too much has changed disease-wise this week. Kind of the same story as last week. When you're looking at a temperature of 76 degrees at 5 a.m. in the morning with humidity, it's lovely to be a pathologist. Maybe not so much for you folks managing turf, but dollar spot, leaf spot, and red thread are still rampant. At this point in time, your cultural practices are out the window. It's all chemical if you want any kind of control. Shorten the windows up to make sure you stay ahead, or if you need to get ahead, you're really going to need to shorten windows up, especially for dollar spot. It doesn't look like things are going to change. And remember, we're not quite into the typical July, August survivability months where we're just trying to keep stuff green and alive to get to September, October. We haven't hit the hard part of summer yet, folks. So if you're having trouble now, it is not going to get better. The one interesting thing I am getting a lot of pictures and 2 or 3 samples of is off-colored POA. People are seeing their POA turn colors, almost looks like patches where it's affecting the POA, but not all the POA. And it's just all over the place. The only thing I found so far to remedy this is to do an aerification, just solid time poking, open them up. A lot of the top parts of the soil are holding water too much because people are fighting the drought that everyone's talking about. So they're overwatering, a lot of old push-ups, areas that have layering and thatch problems. If you have layering and thatch problems, that water's holding up tight. The roots look fine. It's just they're choking to death on the POA. Go ahead and aerate them. And from everybody I've talked to that has followed this, within a day or two, everything's back to normal. It's great. But just like with Pam mentioning POA trib going off much, much earlier than normal, I think we're seeing our POA starting to duck and run for cover too. So you might want a baby POA if you're managing POA or you have a little bit of it. Opening up that soil and getting air down there is going to do you a lot of good. That's all I got for my update, Ed.
Thanks, Todd. One follow-up from the field there last week on the lawn care end of it. Brown patch has been kind of doing a fair amount of damage on tall fescue home lawns. And the other comment was someone had it in their head that an application of phosphorus is going to fix red thread. It's going to be a nitrogen application, and that should have been done a while ago. But the other part is they may be confusing this. Purple leaf tissue can be a sign of some type of stress. And generally in the ag industry, purpling of the leaf tissue has been tied to phosphorus deficiencies. We have shown this in work in Columbus previously, that the high light, cold temperatures can trigger this, drought situations can trigger this, and generally stress to the plant. So this idea of applying phosphorus to fix red thread is not really something that's a runner. It's a nitrogen application, and as Todd is shaking his head left and then up and down, should have been done a while ago. And as Joe Rimmelsbach would have said, over many years, if we don't take care of the red thread, dollar spot's going to follow. So I think other than that, we're all in decent shape. Just I guess hold on to your pants, because that wasn't real impressive news from everyone around here today. Thank you, everybody, and we will talk to you next Friday.